Dear viewers, good day and welcome to our series Visite. Thank you very much for the letters and notes and also the feedback. I have an inquiry from Dresden from Ms. Marion in front of me. Marion is 82 years old. I chose this form. I apologize for being on a first-name basis. And you write me that you have been suffering from severe dryness for many years. You come from Dresden, and maybe I still have some time at the end of the show to be able to tell you what connects me to Dresden in a very, very personal way. But I would like to come back to your query. And although this dry mouth is not limited to the mouth, but you describe that all mucous membranes have dried up, are cracked, burn, and the gut has been a big problem for many, many years. I can see from the records that in 1992 you had a stomach bleed and since then live under a medication with pantazole. We have discussed pantazole many times, the stomach blockers, but I would like to reiterate at this point what pantazole does. And I would now like to show what pantazole causes in large long-term effects, and it is not little. 1 in 100 people treated suffer from pantazole side effects. These are not side effects, these are simply effects, which this so-called stomach calming drug causes. And one effect, I marked it with red, is the terrible dry mouth among many, many other side effects. Pantazole ensures that vitamin B12 is insufficiently absorbed, but in the overall vitamin B12 metabolism a lot of biochemical processes follow, which of course in the case of a chronic vitamin B12 deficiency can no longer run. All this is not so tragic when pantazole is available to temporarily counteract the oversupply of an overstimulated, or, for example, this is called nitrosative stress. As a result of nitrosative stress, the gastric dilator is opened too much and there is a constant reflux of stomach acid in the direction of the throat. These are all things, also for stomach ulcers, where we as doctors were very grateful to be able to get hold of a medicine at the beginning of the 90s, that gave some rest, that the gastric mucosa had some rest at the moment, also to heal. I will never forget that at that time there were already clear appeals that the stomach does not turn into an alkaline environment, but that this application of pantazole is only suitable for short-term use. It's 2022 now. That means since then, you take a drug that changes everything about you. Please don't underestimate what that means for the entire microbiome, intestines, and the long-term consequences. The microbiome, so the entire mucous membranes in us, whether it is the mouth, whether that's the esophagus, whether that's the mucous membranes, the intrahepatic mucous membranes, the bile ducts, the pancreatic duct, or the entire gastrointestinal tract. This is an area of about 300 to 400 meters. whether these are the mucous membranes in the uterine area, vaginal area, the bladder mucous membranes. This process is essentially determined in its activity through the integrity of our microbiome. And this microbiome consists of millions or maybe even trillions of small microorganisms. The body has 100 times more microorganisms in it than body cells. And this healthy microbiome watches over us. Nobody else. These microorganisms organize themselves. These microorganisms fight back for us. These microorganisms produce valuable B vitamins for us. These microorganisms detoxify for us. They clean up, they decompose, they digest, they metabolize. And these microorganisms need a healthy environment to do this work. If over years, here it is even decades, you affect these things, then, of course, certain protective barriers break down. And the stomach has a very special position. The stomach is the one that comes first, following digestion in the mouth, following the passage through the esophagus, that the stomach should now be ready with sufficient gastric acid to ward off microorganisms, pathological microorganisms, bacteria, and parasites. For this it needs a high acidity. And this acidity is always granted from 1.3 to 1.4 p. That is, when this mucosa triggers itself up into an alkaline milieu, you no longer have protection against a mucosal barrier, which will of course change your entire microbiome as a result. And it really is time to make a statement about this microbiome. You can actually do that very quickly by having a stool sample examined and then see exactly in which balance this microbiome is still in balance. Because if the pathology, if the bad bacteria, which are controlled by the good bacteria, multiply more and increasingly destabilize the mucous membrane tract, then of course these are all things that ultimately change as a result of the permanence of this influence. And there you have to, and you can, and you should, in the context of this general dryness of the mucous membranes, and I don't just limit that to the mouth, now it's essential to take care of rebuilding a healthy microbiome. These are simply stool samples that are sent to laboratories in Germany. Of course, you now have to have a good therapist who works with these laboratories. In Germany, this is the Consignment or Biovis laboratory. And these labs have what's called microbiome testing for themselves, which give a lot of information. Of course, you have to be able to understand and read it afterwards. But only then can you be caring and far-sighted to take the body with you in this process, to build up a regular and good mucosal stabilization, to allow mucosal buildup. I couldn't tell from your lines what the stool regulation is like. Of course, you have to make sure that the body can empty itself at least once or twice a day. If it cannot do this, if it repeatedly blocks temporarily due to inflammation in the intestines, then this is a high level of intoxication. Intoxication means that there are highly toxic substances such as metabolic end products, scatol, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, which in turn also burden the mucous membranes. And when the intestinal mucosa becomes more permeable, then it is called lipopolysaccharide. These are endotoxins from bacteria that pass into the blood. And of course now the body has to manage this bacterial toxin pressure as part of its defense. That means you should try, and of course you need professional help to find a way to reduce the attack to the mucous membrane. That means you absolutely have to get away from this pentazole. It seems to me as if this acid of life, and therefore I'll show now two very valuable book tips. This life acid, this stomach acid, it is the only one formed in our body and has high vital functions. And giving pentazole is like the lid on a fountain for me. This fountain wants to powerfully form a fountain, and you keep the lid on it. You are now keeping the lid on and are preventing this acid from forming. That's logical. The body registers the use, the body registers the important function, and it is massively switched off. In addition, the stomach cell not only produces stomach acid, but also sodium bicarbonate, which we all need to buffer our blood. For the blood, along with all other parts, has an absolutely stable pH value in our organism. And the body will never argue with us. It needs to maintain this blood pH of around 7.3 to 7.4. There are long-term consequences due to pH destabilization in the stomach. There can be insane inflammation when the mucosa of the bladder has a different pH. But these are all diseases. But a change in blood pH is incompatible with life. So where does the body get this counter-regulation from? And it will be a consequence of the fact that we are dealing here with a massive mucosal dysfunction in the long term. Therefore, for me, the intestine is always like a garden. The whole gastrointestinal area is like a garden. In my treatment, I always start with the intestines, no matter what is named above and how. Since 1991, the intestines have been brought into balance. And that is really a big task for you at this point. Because I can't suddenly expect these mucous membranes to regenerate if I don't first replace the foundation again. That I first relieve the detoxification capacity of the intestine of things it has tolerated for many, many years. And at this point I would like to recommend drinking more to you. This is not a healing earth, this is a drinking more in liquid form. And you can get it from the pharmacy. And this drinking more contains an incredible amount of minerals. So in the drinking more there is a lot of calcium, magnesium, iron, potassium, chromium, molybdenum, fats, zinc, all those things. Also amino acids, proteins, and a variety of humic acids. That is, If you only drink once a day about 20 milliliters of this, drinking more in a glass of water, then the gut and the whole gastrointestinal tract will be filled with good things first and will restore an environment from the deepest level, gently, what is allowed to regenerate again. It is important that you do this, and you will find from a stool sample, how is the flora achomesia, how much lactic acid, lactobacilli, echinococcus is still present. That's 80% of the total microflora, made up by these anaerobic, non-oxygen requiring bacteria. It is very important to know how the liver and pancreas work and with what force. It is also very important to know if there is any inflammation. Has there been increased mucosal permeability for a long time? And that means a continuous intestinal buildup over many, long months. It would also be very, very valuable to do a diagnostic for parasites here. I can't stress that enough, because we're just seeing these things too, that the body is dealing with these stresses entirely. The mucous membranes are the first barrier, and out of the stool sample, for example, through the level of a so-called secretory IgA, you can make a statement about the mucosal immunity. And then build up that mucosal immunity. This will be very important in the future. Via Bacillus subtilis, via colostrum, there are so many ways to rebuild mucosal immunity. But these are patient processes that, in my opinion, will become very valuable in the future, that the entire drainage system around the mucous membranes feels addressed again and can get back into some activity. These are the things that concern the entire gastrointestinal tract. Of course, the mucous membranes also depend on my vitamin A status. These are values that you then have to have determined. What is my vitamin D status? People with gastrointestinal problems, with digestive pains, with inflammations benefit incredibly from an optimally adjusted vitamin D supply. On the other hand, it is also very important, even if you are 82 years old, that you allow an examination on the hormonal level. Because even at 82, you need a sufficient demand for estrogen, which is important for all mucous membranes. Estriol is a form of estrogen. Estrogen has 3 different forms. And if you also have this terrible inflammatory pain of dry mucous membranes, vaginally, but also on the part of the bladder, for example, through so-called vaginal ovula, either with a magistral prescription, but also through the ovid capsules or ovula, you can have a preparation made or ask the pharmacy to order it for you. That would be 12,500 units of vitamin D coupled to estriol, to 0.5 milligrams of estriol. These vaginal suppositories are so valuable, even for colpitis, so when the cervix is inflamed, vaginitis, when the mucous membranes are dry again and again. And the formula can also incorporate calendula either as the hormone or calendula as well. And calendula, the marigold, to release this inflammatory pressure and regeneration. Of course, You can also play and change with this ovula. But don't underestimate, in 90% you can see that this mucosal melia then regenerates itself very strongly. Of course, please always remember that our mucous membranes as women are also very acidic, and in this regard we need again and again the dextrorotatory lactic acid vagisin sub. There are so many products containing lactic acid bacteria also for this gynecological area. I really think you shouldn't give up hope. Find a colleague trained in complementary medicine who will accompany you on this path. Please don't suffer anymore. It's not needed at all. So in my advice I would think of a lot of other things, but you can start with these things, and above all you have to get away from the pantazole. And I have now shown you these 2 book recommendations. Books are written for people like you, who of course also understand a lot more from them and which also make people alert. Because the pantazole belongs in the hands of the doctor. It shouldn't be freely available in my opinion. And the indications for this drug are very, very much to reduce. And we should all be aware that by doing so alone we have a major impact on what is happening as a whole. I sincerely hope and wish that I was able to help you with this. And I think I still have a little time, and I just want to tell you that I'm from Greifswald and my parents used to use the autumn holidays to show us the district capitals when we were children. And of course we went to Dresden too. And I remember that we weren't just in Dresden once, but very, very often. And the Frauenkirche lay there in its ruins, and I heard the stories over and over again. I was born in 1959, so life was still very much shaped by the post-war period. And for me it was one of the biggest events of my life, 2005, not immediately at the opening of the Frauenkirche, but immediately a week later. And that was on October 30th, 2005. And I was still sad in the summer when someone wrote to me that Bach's St. John Passion would not be played, but a modern piece by Siegfried Matthes and the Te Deum. And then I thought to myself, I've had some not so good experiences with modern music and was a little bit sad at first, but then this big day came for me. I can't put it into words. To experience the Frauenkirche in all its loveliness. It was a lot smaller than I thought, in that shade of rose, the fresh wood. It was full of guests from all over the world. At the podium Siegfried Matthes, the radio choir and the boys' choir. And then the history of the Frauenkirche was transferred to music. As visitors, we were able to read along with the story, and actually we were sitting in the top gallery. We couldn't see what was going on down there. And I remember that the whole time we stood at the gallery and held on, my husband and I, because it was so moving, this musical implementation of this night of bombing. And it was incredible. And then it was over. And then all of a sudden there was dead silence in this Frauenkirche. And then the bells upstairs rang outside for 5 minutes. And after that stopped, there was an a cappella Amen from a boy who sang a cappella through the church. And after that, everyone broke into incredible emotions. So that was one of my greatest and deepest experiences. And that I kind of remembered that right away. I often remember it, but when I read a name and from Dresden, and I just wanted to give it back, how grateful I was when the world helped to rebuild this Frauenkirche, of course in memory of what happened back then in 1945 to this city and to these people. Dear viewers, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your attention and wish you a peaceful week, and I'm really looking forward to the next episode of Visite. Whenever you have questions, concerns, which I can discuss anonymously in public, feel free to write to me at visite@qs24.tv. And then we'll see each other again. Goodbye.